When you look back on all villains, you generally just know that they are the bad guys themselves no matter what film you watch. I should know that too, creating so many videos regarding how good each individual villain could be based on what story is being told or how it's applied. And until now, I just mostly did the separate categories regarding films or the studios itself, applying what they know best at and what they're good regardless. But I never really did a full-on comparison to the extent I want to do right now. Because, as I have assumed you noticed, this title is focusing on Pixar versus Disney in terms of this area of antagonistic foes. And this is something I haven't really done quite yet when I focus on them individually, in terms of how their stories worked or how we need to be distinct from one another and how people treat Disney-owned properties. Coming up with subjects like how they don't need musicals or music, or how one studio needs villains and of course the other ones don't, or how this specific group of villains work. Where yes, I have done some comparisons of those characters in those videos, but how I want to incorporate the entire classics against each other and see how interesting their differences really are when we know what they stand for. Where this is not a video to say one is better than the other or someone else just does a bad job. I mean, that's what ranking lists are actually for, to rate them. Where this is just a fun way to look on how characters can be done. Like several other people I know would say, it's a situation that's same but different. For very good reasons, of course. For example, before we start off, the broad overview would tell us that Disney villains are pure evil, plain and simple. They come from the storybook pages of fairy tales galore to a life that shows bad actors willing to do bad things for the sake of it. Or maybe the occasional person who has an end goal that can be justified against a heroic definition, where they are just fun characters that love being bad, and we love the fact that they are that bad. On the other hand, with Pixar, they are not completely bad. I mean, there are quite a few who do show it, but there's still a more grounded element within those characters, that they take things more seriously with emotion to their backstory, or just regular young kids starting out with Toy Story. That you get to know these characters much better as much as your hero in a Pixar story, or less if they are a human character that interacts with the animal or inanimate objects because of its scale, where Pixar does a good job at scaling things down in the world because of their stories for obvious reasons, which makes the normal elements of life seem more scarier or threatening like a normal villain would. Like you can see here a pattern and style that develops that blurs the lines of complete villains in a good way compared to what Disney can lack when they don't have one or just attempt to be more than what they should be. But again, with those facts, let's go way back in Disney history with the first couple of villains. You already know the drill with those like the Evil Queen and up to Maleficent, where they just value themselves more than other people, where we start off with foes that are really selfish and love what they do, dabbling with dark magic and potions galore. More specifically, as we know, with Maleficent, she is that leader and the most iconic, the fairy that revels in all the powers of hell based on being snarky that she wasn't invited to Aurora's birth. That as Disney showed us how to bring fairy tales to life, they showed us how evil just loves being evil. That they want to do this thing willingly, being aware of their actions against whatever good tries to do because they just love to do that. Others like Captain Hook of course are just too fixated on the antics that heroes like Peter Pan could cause, where it is understandable if you chase after them or just want to do what's best because you live that sort of pirate life. That they're hotheads, quick to temper or temptation of certain individuals in the story no matter which way it goes, because that's who they are. That each one demonstrates a grand lesson for the kids to learn or a reminder of what can go wrong as we grow older. Where the golden age of Disney simply was straight to the point of what these foes were trying to accomplish or do, animated with a flair of delicious evil that also came back in full force in the Disney Renaissance. Where with that, the villains themselves develop more complexity while retaining their evilness to an extent when you look at the likes of Ursula or Jafar, but also to that very human nature of feeling justified in those characters like Frollo, standing out as he thinks he's right and good, but also showing his exterior and true heart to still be as bad as they all can be. And again, you still have more comical styles as well with villains with the variety in the vanity of Gaston or the salesman routine of Hades, having this crazy fun variety added within the characters. Like you learn to love their personality but still hate what they do as villains because that's the intention. Their intention is against all things that are good, but they also have so much fun with it. I mean, in between the Renaissance and when Walt Disney died, there was also a variety of villains that were interesting, no doubt, some actually being not what they seemed and probably anti-villains to an extent, but these characters are what came to be expected from them. They all had these interesting backgrounds to tell no matter where they came from, and it worked to great success against the story of our heroes. And you really don't get bored of it because of how much personality they could shove into them in the animation itself, like with the very sassy lion who wants to kill his brother. Because Did you really expect that it could get as interesting as that? But what's even more interesting is how Pixar just doesn't have that image at all, even with their most villainous characters. Like again, beginning with films like Toy Story, your first villain was just a kid who looked like your typical bully. He does laugh and wear things you expect a villain would wear, but you also understand that it's just a boy messing around with toys, even if it's at the cost of his own sister. Or you have that concept of expanding the world to a smaller degree with how toys view things against giant humans and how they feel being played with or tortured in Sid's case, depending on how some people use these objects. Similar in the case with Finding Nemo of how humans apparently would actually capture Nemo, rescuing him from the sea according to Philip Sherman, and then the fish just scared straight for Darla for messing around with them in the tank, or whatever happened to her other fish because of her youthful attitude. They aren't the greatest produced Pixar villains as we will talk about, but they certainly are far from what Disney would normally do considering where their stories take place, hardly expecting kids to take those roles or even talk about them in the way that they do. But it just works to a great degree because the world of fish or toys are so much different than our own, and our own actions can seem villainous to them even while it's not, or it just seems like typical behavior. But the more typical villainous examples actually begin with Hopper from Bug's Life, who takes on that threatening role as a grasshopper over the ants. This is where you get to see that same but different kind of style, since he does act as a control freak over the ants and his own gang like an abuser, but more serious because he feels threatened by things bigger than him, either individually or large numbers like ants, without even being remotely evil, if you get what I'm trying to say. Like, he isn't that Disney villain image, but he does have that threatening presence. Again, you can apply the same logic to Monsters Inc. with Water News, where yes, he does have the slyness of Randall on his side trying to best Sully and work with him, but you also have this character that has this very real fear of desperation for a company during an energy crisis, doing the worst things possible, but just for the good of the people, apparently in his mind. Just a case of a villain that comes from the need to do more rather than doing it just because without it, things could go wrong, right? But of course, the most similar case to regular Disney villains would be Syndrome, with the way he acts as a grown-up, with the counts of heroes he's actually killed with his Omni-droids, all because of his idol didn't actually want him, who learned not to count on his help even while he needed help himself. Like we see as he grows older, he embraces his villainous role to those he looked up to because they never really helped them in the first place when it really counted according to the rules, while providing what could be to the public. It's a nice way to blend both sides from a superhero story aspect as to what should be expected from that, yet also feeling very different from that Disney image, going again with the greater human villains like Charles Muntz, who just went insane looking for a bird in the jungle to clear his name, or Ernesto de la Cruz just wanting fame, backstabbing his friend in order to fulfill that image, which many people could actually relate to having other friends backstab him for greater plans. Or even how Toy Story 2 or 3 went on to create toy antagonists from their very understandable perspectives of not feeling loved at all, being abandoned as what should be expected, and how they grow up to see the world. Just again of how you could see where these villains are coming from with the stories that are being told, where the adventure is leading towards the reflections of the heroes themselves of what they could be if they don't do right, or the other way around. They never take a directly evil approach that I'm aware of, where most are just doing what they feel is right into fulfilling their own life. Whether it come from a robotic steering wheel just following a directive given long ago to preserve humanity, or a short chef just trying to chase down rats because he wants to keep his position as that chef. And just whatever you could think of in between, where even the bad ones just have that flair of doing what is best for the greater public in their mind, even if the consequences are dangerous, rather than Disney villains just being Disney villains. I mean, of course you could mention the recent Disney villains are ones that tried to do more, but time and time again, as we also talked about, they just did fail miserably as well because they didn't work out well within the broader context of their stories, in terms of those like Yokai from Big Hero 6 as the greatest example of a modern sympathetic villain with more than being evil in some form, which his counterparts in Hans actually took that evil direction, but not a very good one. But again, all isn't bad in the modern era, as we talked before with those like Mother Gothel taking a neat step towards Disney while tributing to the past with femme fatales, since she cared about her own looks like the evil queen herself, and added on with the fact that she's just an old woman who wants to stay young forever and use a little girl for her own gain, parading her as her very mother. Where that is just still very different from Pixar in the case, because she is so selfish and narcissistic in some ways, that there isn't an attitude about these Disney villains that exists for their own desire that isn't really present in Pixar. Like Turbo being king of another video game because he was jealous, similar to Scar with Mufasa, that he jumps from game to game just for his own selfish desire. That you understand you have to apply yourself to the levels of different insanity that a villain could provide, whether it be an accurate, realistic setting or just straight from the pages of a book, coming with the most fancy descriptions possible, where they all actually succeed at their own strengths, and that's just a very nice thing to see their clear differences, yet still feel as if they're in the same class. Same, but different. And that's why we actually love them all, except for this guy who tried to blend in everything and became the worst one possible. Which is just how one's personality can shine that can make all the difference in the world, especially in the persistent 3D era that all studios love to do, including Disney and Pixar that are just, the same style. Where because of that, it just all boils down to the characters themselves to make their true difference. Where sure, heroes are very different too, and that's clear to how they make their movies, both Pixar and Disney, but the villains really change things on a whole different level that shows you what kind of film you are watching under that Disney umbrella. Also lastly mentioning the fact again that Pixar has the advantage of doing well with movies that don't have villains at all, unlike a few boring snooze fests. But with that all said, it's all based on how you can perceive things, whether you know what you're doing is good or bad, and how much you enjoy doing it compared to the actions of a pitiful hero that we will forever cherish as long as we will live. So long live all villains, may they endure in all shapes and sizes, and I'm all done. Goodbye.